Chamai, welcome! In this video, you'll learn about the archaeological excavation of the Inyuk site on Sitkalidak Island during the summer of 2021. My name is Hollis Miller, co-director of the Old Harbor Archaeological History Project run through the University of Washington in partnership with the Old Harbor Native Corporation and the Alutiiq Tribe of Old Harbor. The Inyuk site is located in Tanganak Anchorage on Sitkalidak Island. It is an old village that was built and occupied by Alutiiq or Sugpiaq ancestors. The site is composed of many houses, or chikluat, now only visible as wide and shallow pits, along with middens or garbage piles that contain the remains of animals that Inyuk people harvested. Our team excavated at this site to learn more about late pre-colonial and colonial Alutiiq life. Ancestors started living here probably about 400 years ago and continued to do so until about the year 1840. During the time that the site was occupied, Russian fur traders arrived on Kodiak and forced Alutiiq ancestors to work for them. The Russians often used violence to get their way. They also inadvertently introduced diseases to Kodiak, to which Alutiiq ancestors had no built-up immunity. Needless to say, the years and decades after Russian arrival were disastrous for Alutiiq people. Yet they persevered and preserved Alutiiq culture to the present day. The archaeological research that we are doing at Inyuk is providing a window into the past to see how ancestors lived and navigated Russian demands. In the next section, my colleague Nathan Mitchell and I will talk about some of the artifacts we found this summer.
Hi there, I'm Nathan Mitchell, a junior at the University of Washington, and I worked at Inyuk this summer. We're going to start off by talking about some of the artifacts we found there this summer. First artifact here, you can see it's a ground cobble, and what we think it's used for is a weight used for fishing, either as a line weight on deep sea fishing, or a weight attached to a net for net fishing. On to more active hunting tools. Here we have a bone arrowhead. And now this is an interesting piece, not only because it's made of bone, but because it would have been blunt-ended. The reason we'd use a blunt-ended tool like this would be to be able to stun birds in order to not harm the skin, to gather them and use them for clothing like parkas and other pieces. Now on to a really interesting piece. This is a lance preform. And so we can imagine how this could be formed into a piece like this, similar size, similar shape. And so they would have been first created from a larger piece of slate by Sugpiaq ancestors by grinding the edges thinly and then snapping them like a candy bar. Then, to further thin them down into a thin piece like this, which has really fine edges, they would have been ground on a piece of stone like this. This is a sandstone, so it's a bit grittier. Think like a sandpaper. And then they would have been slowly ground down into even finer and finer pieces. See here, it even has a little bit of shine to it. That's how finally they're sanding it down to make this lance head. Here's an interesting piece. This is an end blade that would have been used on a harpoon. It would have then been attached to a larger piece of the head that holds it on to the rest of the harpoon. Moving on to tools that would be used for processing. Here we have a collection of ulus that we found at Inyuk this summer. Now these are really beautiful tools that obviously took a long time to make. And so one thing we consider in how these were used is that they would have been used for processing fish, think filleting, or scraping hides and other uses. These are traditionally considered women's knives, but you can see that there's a large range of variability between how they're shaped, which makes us think that there's a lot of personalization to these tools. Another interesting thing that we see in these are these lovely drilled holes. And so that would have obviously taken a lot of work and would have been risking kind of the whole piece if it did crack and break. Now, those would have been used to attach handles, but that doesn't mean that other ulus didn't have handles, because we can imagine attaching a handle to something like this, either through tying it on or having a tight enough fit onto the ulu so that you're not gripping the hard slate as you're using it in your daily work. Moving on to artifacts that would be used in cooking or storage, we have these lovely pottery sherds. Now these are really interesting because of the sort of clay that was being used to make these. we can see in them, especially in a piece like this, how gravelly it is. You can actually see chunks of rock in the clay. And that's interesting because that makes the clay really crumbly when we're talking about it in an archaeological context. And so to find pieces of this size, especially in a place that's so wet like Kodiak, is really interesting. We even found a mostly complete pot, which we then left at the Alutiiq Museum this summer. Additionally is the size of these pots. While this itself is a relatively small piece, think of your cooking pots at home. They're circular. So this itself would have been a rather large pot. Additionally, when we're thinking about these pots, we have to think about what they were used for. Not only would they have been used for storage or cooking, but also the rendering of marine mammal oil.
This set of tools here would have been used for making things and for processing hides. This first tool we have is a hammerstone, which is literally a rock that people would use to hammer things. And you can see that there's multiple surfaces on it that have been worn by use. So this tool was used many, many times over by Alutiiq ancestors. These next two items here are both scrapers. This one is made out of greenstone, and this one is made out of chert. Scrapers are used for exactly what the name sounds like, of scraping animals' flesh off of hides before they are tanned, and then used for making clothing, for making kayak covers, and for making tents. And so this would have been the first process after skinning the animal would be to scrape its skin down before the tanning process. And after a hide has been tanned, you would use a tool like this, which is made of pumice. It's a really light volcanic rock, and it works like sandpaper, as it's very rough on all of its surfaces, and you would use it to soften and smooth the skins of the animal after they had been tanned. And this last item we have here is an awl. That's A-W-L, and this is a tool that is used for poking holes in hides before you sew them together. And you know, I'm sure you're familiar with animal hides. They're really thick, and so a regular needle and thread won't pass through them unless you've pre-made a hole, and so that's what this tool is for. And it's made out of bird bone, and specifically this is the humerus of a bird, or the bone that's in the upper part of a bird's wing. And bird bone is often used for this kind of task because it's really strong and it's really straight. And in addition to the awls being made out of bird bone, the needles that people were using would also be made out of bird bone. The last item we have here is a labret, which is a piece of jewelry that's worn in the face. This one, based on its shape and size, was probably worn medially, so a single labret worn just under the lip here. Labrets are a really cool part of ancestral Sugpiaq Alutiiq culture because they're a way of signaling your family affiliation right on your face. And so the style of the labret would have been different for each clan or extended family. And so when you're encountering someone while wearing a labret, they can figure out exactly how you're related to them and who else you're related to just by seeing the jewelry on your face. And this is a really long documented tradition in Kodiak and across the Sugpiaq region where we see Alutiiq ancestors representing themselves in petroglyphs and in incised slate pebbles, wearing labrets, and that tradition is extending back more than 1,000 years. We also found a small collection of glass trade beads, which Alutiiq people valued for decorating their clothing and making into beautiful jewelry and headdresses. These beads are small, seed bead size, in shades of blue, white, red, and black. They were brought to Kodiak by Russian fur traders who gave them to Alutiiq ancestors as gifts or in exchange for furs and labor. Thanks for learning with us about the Inyuk site. We are continuing to research the collections shown here and welcome any comments, interpretations, or questions that you have. All the artifacts from the 2021 field season are currently cared for at the University of Washington in Seattle on a temporary loan. They will be transferred to the care of the Alutiiq Museum by the end of 2023. I look forward to continued collaboration and conversation with Old Harbor as we keep learning more about the Sugpiaq Alutiiq ancestors who lived at Inyuk. Thank you very much.